This is one of the most important at-bats in MLB history. Most of you will never forget what happens here, and certainly not this man, Howie Kendrick. How did he immortalize himself in MLB history? Let's find out. As it turns out, Kendrick comes from very humble beginnings. He went to West Nassau High in Callahan, Florida. At graduation, he was 5'7", 110 pounds with no travel ball experience whatsoever. That meant no big league interest and no recruiters. He tried out for several JUCOs, but there were no takers until St. John's River Community College in Palatka, Florida finally did take him on. He knew he had to make people notice him if he wanted to succeed. So he went ahead and won Conference Player of the Year in 2002. Tom Kochman, a scout for the Los Angeles Angels, heard about Kendrick from another coach from another Florida community college and decided to visit Kendrick on a whim. Shortly after BP started, he ran to his car, grabbed a video camera, and started recording Kendrick crushing baseballs. And then he dropped the all-time greatest quote I think you could ever get as an amateur baseball player. "I couldn't believe there weren't scouts out there, and other JCs cut this guy? What were they thinking?" From that point on, Kochman spent the rest of the season avoiding Kendrick to hide his secret so that the Angels could eventually go on to pick him in the 10th round of the 2002 draft. So for an undersized, unnoticed kid, things were turning out pretty well. Through every stop in the minors, Howie Kendrick had an OPS of 952 or better from 2003 to 2006, and Baseball America deemed him the clear standout and best prospect in the Texas League in 2005 after just 46 games at the AA level. Keep in mind that there were guys like Kendrys Morales, Andre Ethier, and Eric Ibar all at that level at the same time. In 2006, Kendrick started the year in AAA and was named the number 12 prospect by Baseball America, and after 69 games, he was hitting .369 with an insane .631 slugging percentage, 13 home runs, and 11 steals. He was called up to the majors on April 26 versus the Detroit Tigers and got his first knock off of Barry Zito the very next start. He finished that season hitting .285 with a .730 OPS, 4 homers, 6 steals in just 72 games, so he left a major mark and showed that he was a proven major league hitter. That offseason, starting second baseman Adam Kennedy joined the St. Louis Cardinals as a free agent, meaning Kendrick was now the starter for Los Angeles. He went from no scholarships out of high school to a starting major leaguer in just 6 years. However, in his sophomore season, he dealt with injuries, a foreshadowing of what was to come in his career. Missed about 2.5 months. Although when he was on the field, he played very well, hitting .322 and a nearly .800 OPS. He also recorded 5 homers and 5 steals. The Angels had a pretty good season, winning 96 ball games and the AL West, and went on to play Boston in that ALDS. However, you might remember who won the World Series that year. Needless to say, the Angels were swept in that series 3-0. Kendrick didn't play overly well either, just 2 for 10 with a couple steals and an RBI. In 2008, obviously Kendrick wanted to play more and win in the playoffs, but injuries got in the way again. He only played 4 more games than he did the year prior, missed about 6 weeks from April through May, and then went on to miss another 3 weeks with another injury. The Angels played really well, winning 100 games even that season, but they had to rematch the Boston Red Sox in the ALDS again. And this time, the Red Sox got the upper hand again, a 3-1 defeat. Kendrick was worse off this time, just 2 for 19 with 7 strikeouts, and they didn't have the excuse of playing the World Series champions. The Angels and Kendrick were stalling out. 2009 was the turning point both for the Angels and for Kendrick. Maybe it was the sting of 2 postseason losses, maybe it was lower confidence, but for whatever reason, Howie Kendrick was not playing well. On June 11th, his slash line did not look that great. He was sent down to AAA. After 3 years in Major League Baseball and 2.5 as a starter, he was no longer able to make people notice him. Still undersized, still soft-spoken, he had to hit his way to the majors, and he was gonna have to do it again. He played 20 games at the AAA level that season, and he hit 346 with a 939 OPS, a couple home runs, 11 runs driven in, 4 swipes, over 162 game pace, that's 89 runs driven in, and 32 steals. He came back up in July and hit extremely well. In the second half alone, he had 150 OPS plus during that time. What that means is he was 1.5 players essentially in the second half. He led the Angels to their 5th AL West championship in 6 years and their 3rd in a row. This took them to the postseason, and they were facing, guess who? It was another 3-game sweep. But this time, the Angels won. Down 5-2 in the 8th in Boston, Angels were able to score twice in the 8th and 3 times in the 9th to head to the ALCS. Kendrick only got 5 at-bats in that series, but he did produce a little bit, but he really made his mark in the ALCS. Game 3 versus the New York Yankees, down 3-0 in the 5th, he launched one out of the park to put the Angels on the board. If you haven't heard of WPA, or win probability added, before, it's a stat that measures how a particular play affects the outcome of a game. For example, Howie Kendrick's home run added a 9.2% chance that the Angels would win that game. Later, tied 3-3 in the 7th, he hit a triple with 1 out, which increased it by 14.5%. Then, with 2 outs in the 11th, he got a base hit off David Robertson and scored the game-winning run on a Jeff Mathis double. Overall, he played very well in that ALCS. However, that was not enough to take the Angels to the World Series. They ultimately lost to the Yankees 4-2. However, that does not mean it was a failure. Kendrick and the Angels finally broke through and showed the world what they were capable of and were ready to do again. Then a funny thing happened. The Angels started to suck. Sean Figgins, Vlad Guerrero, John Latke, and Darren Oliver all left after that 2009 season. From 2010 to 2013, the Angels were barely above 500 with a couple of losing seasons and no playoff appearances whatsoever. Kendrick, however, played very well through this time. Over those 4 seasons, he had an OPS 11% better than the average player, with 49 home runs and 48 steals. He was maybe the Angels' most consistent player and could have been the biggest name on the team. Except for... In 2011, he made his first and only All-Star team with the 2nd best season of his career. 18 home runs and 10 coming in the second half, knocking in 63 runs, 14 steals for a career high. Then in 2014, things started to click again. The Angels had a monster July and August back-to-back and were able to win the division by 10 games and secure the best record in Major League Baseball. And Kendrick was fantastic that year. He had his 2nd best batting average in a season where he played more than 92 games, his best OPS, and he tied his best in both steals and RBIs, and his 2nd best season in terms of scoring runs. He even got MVP votes that season. And the privilege of finishing with the best record in Major League Baseball, the Angels got to play the Kansas City Royals, the wild card, and they were poised to go back to the championship series, and they were swept 3-0. Howie Kendrick didn't play particularly well either. He struck out twice late with runners on in a tied game 1, left 5 runners on base, and on just those 2 at-bats, he subtracted a 15.2% chance of his team winning. After just 2 hits and 5 strikeouts on the series, he left 9 runners on base. That was the last postseason the Angels have played to present. Kendrick scored the very last run of the postseason for the Angels, and weirdly enough, Josh Hamilton was the guy who drove him in. Weird things going on with the Angels. On December 11th, Kendrick was traded to the Dodgers for Andrew Heaney. Then in 2015 with the Dodgers, Kendrick played very well but was injured in early August and didn't make it back until September. Once again, he had to remind the baseball world he was there. And that postseason he did. He went 6 for 22 with a double and a 9th inning home run, driving in 3. However, the Dodgers lost in 5 games to the Cubs in the NLDS. Then in 2016, Kendrick signed a 2-year deal with the Dodgers, which showed they were committed to finding playing time for him. And this led to the worst season of his entire career. Through 146 games, his OPS plus was well below 100, and it was the only career where his OPS was below 700. He also had the highest ground ball rate of anyone in Major League Baseball and the lowest fly ball rate at the same time. This resulted in a bench and pinch hitter role in the postseason. In the division series, he went 3 for 9 with a double and a run scored against the Nats, but in the CS, he went just 2 for 13 against the Cubs. Of the 6 teams Howie Kendrick had lost to in the postseason, 5 of them went on to the World Series and 3 of them won it. Now at age 32, the question had to be asked, could he bounce back? The Dodgers decided that Kendrick's career trajectory just didn't fit with the team and decided to trade him to the Phillies that offseason. In 2017, he played well with Philly, but a sign of the end reared its ugly head: injuries. He had 2 major ones and missed about 2.5 months. Philly decided that this was the most they could possibly get out of Kendrick and traded him to Washington at the deadline. While now Kendrick had been sort of thrown all over the place recently, he did find himself in a pretty good situation. The Nats had made the playoffs 3 of the last 5 years and never finished lower than second in the NL East. They had some great players like Bryce Harper, Max Scherzer, and Steven Strasburg, but they couldn't get past the division series. And Howie Kendrick needed to make the world remember his name again. The best way to do it was get them over the hump. He stayed healthy and played well that season with an increased slugging percentage once he made it to Washington, hitting 7 home runs versus just the 2 he hit with Philly. The Nats won the NL East for the 4th time in 6 years. For the first time ever, they made the postseason 2 years in a row. Despite the NLDS going 5 games against the defending champs, Kendrick didn't start a single time, only collecting 3 plate appearances as the Nats lost again. And now Kendrick was in a similar situation as he was when he was traded to the Dodgers. He signed back with the Nats for 2 years, this time working with the organization, getting more starts at second base. However, tragedy struck. On May 19, 2018, Kendrick ruptured his Achilles, ending his season right then and there. Now he would be headed into his age 35 season. He was injured in over half of his seasons throughout his career, but he could still hit. There was potential there. If he could just put it all together one last time, maybe it could finally happen for him. But Washington missed out on the postseason in 2018 without him. What was going to come of the team? What was going to come of Howie Kendrick? The window was closing fast, and not just for Kendrick, but also for the Nationals. Bryce Harper had just left, Ryan Zimmerman was getting ready to retire, Steven Strasburg had a looming opt-out, and Anthony Rendon was due to hit free agency. Then in 2019, the last chance seemingly for the Nationals, they started off 19-31.
Gentlemen, it has been a privilege playing with you tonight.
Just an absolutely atrocious start for such a talented team. 10 games back of first place and the second to worst record in the National League. They had a 0.1% chance of winning the World Series at that point. Then Kendrick and the rest of the team kicked it into high gear. From May 26 to September 27, Howie Kendrick was fantastic. In those 79 games, he had over a 1. OPS, 10 home runs, a .392 batting average on balls in play, and the Nationals were 49-30 in those games. 2019 just so happened to be the best season of Howie Kendrick's career. .344 average, .395 on base, .572 slugging, a .966 OPS, 146 OPS plus, and just 49 strikeouts on the year. And Kendrick has always been a particularly clutch player, but in 2019, he did his absolute best work of his career. Late and close, he was twice as good as the league average player. I mean, just look at this slugging percentage. This is insane. These aren't real numbers. And the Nats were every bit as good during the stretch, which led to a 74-38 record after May 24. However, the Nats didn't win the NL East, but they did make the wild card. This led to a crazy 1-game playoff where they had a dramatic victory over the Milwaukee Brewers. Then came the NLDS, the round the Nationals have never been able to get past in their entire history. And it was coming against the Los Angeles Dodgers, Kendrick's former team. They had been to the World Series in each of the last 2 seasons and lost both times, so you know they meant business this year. Game 1 in Los Angeles did not go the Nationals' way though. 6-0 loss where Washington had just 2 hits on the night. In Game 2 it started out small. Howie Kendrick had an RBI single in the first which opened the scoring, and a couple other RBI knocks did the trick in a 4-2 victory. This tied the series heading back to Washington. But LA punched back, daring the Nats to get back up. A 7-run 6 did them in the 10-4 defeat, and the Dodgers were just 1 win away from getting to the championship series again, and the Nats were 1 loss away from history repeating itself. But in Game 4, the Nats answered, and was due in part to Howie Kendrick, who got his second hit of the night in the bottom of the 5th, allowing Ryan Zimmerman to break the game open with a 3-run shot. This propelled them to the victory and tied the series heading back to Los Angeles. Then came Game 5, maybe the most interesting game of the entire postseason in 2019. The Dodgers struck first by scoring 2 in the first and 1 in the second to take a 3-0 lead. Meanwhile, Howie Kendrick got off to a terrible start. He struck out in the second, committed an error in the bottom of the third, and then with Soto in scoring position, he smashed this line drive to center field, only to get robbed by Cody Bellinger. But the Nats were able to gain a little bit of momentum. An Anthony Rendon double and a Juan Soto RBI single got things moving, but all that momentum was erased as Howie Kendrick immediately grounded into a double play. There was still hope though. Clayton Kershaw was left in a little bit too long in relief, and Anthony Rendon and Juan Soto went back to back off the future Hall of Famer. Then Howie Kendrick was due up just in time for a pitching change where he struck out and the momentum came to a screeching halt. So at this point, Howie Kendrick was 0 for 4 with a couple of strikeouts, an error, and a double play. However, the game remained tied into the top of the 10th, and things started to click for the Nationals. A walk from Adam Eaton, an Anthony Rendon double then forced them to walk Soto, bringing up the struggling Howie Kendrick. They wanted to face him. They didn't see him as big of a threat as everyone else. After a mound visit, Joe Kelly delivered a first pitch curveball, and Kendrick was timed for the fastball. Kelly saw this and said, "You know what? I don't think you can handle my fastball," and challenged him inside.
This is deep to center field. Bellinger's back. It's a grand slam. Howie Kendrick with a 10th inning grand slam to break it open.
For the first time in the history of Major League Baseball, the Washington Nationals made it past the division series and a 7-3 win in 10 innings over the Los Angeles Dodgers in LA. And Howie Kendrick's terrible day turned into one of the best of his entire career. Kelly tried to shove a fastball down his throat, but he hit back and said, "Get off me!" The Dodgers wouldn't forget him now. Then came the NLCS versus another storied franchise, the St. Louis Cardinals, and it really wasn't even close. A 4-game sweep for the Nationals, and Howie Kendrick was the biggest contributor for that series. In Game 1, Kendrick led off the second with a double and then scored on a Yan Gomes double, and then in the 7th, he drove in the second run of the game, meaning he scored half of the game's runs and knocked in the other half. Then in Game 3, he was absolutely electric in front of the home crowd. He went 3 for 4 with 3 doubles, 3 runs knocked in, a couple of runs scored, and an 8-1 rout. When the series was all said and done, he was 5 for 15 with 4 doubles, 4 RBIs, 4 runs scored in just 4 games, and that was good enough to win him the NLCS MVP. The Cardinals can't forget him. This meant it was time for Howie Kendrick and the Washington Nationals' first ever World Series. And it was coming against one of the toughest opponents possible. The Houston Astros had just won the World Series in 2017 and lost to the champions the year before in the ALCS. So once again, the Nats had the odds stacked against them.
20-1. Never tell me the odds.
After a tightly contested Game 1 where the Nats were able to eke out a victory by 1 run, Kendrick made his first real impact in Game 2. After a first inning 2-run double from Rendon and a 2-run homer by Alex Bregman, the game remained tied all the way to the 7th inning. Kurt Suzuki was able to break the tie with a home run, but Howie Kendrick delivered with 2 outs and the bases full, driving in the game-winning run. This meant the Nats were up 2-0, headed back to Washington. However, this is where the series completely shifted. Houston started to really take over once they made it to the road. In Game 4, they blew it wide open with an 8-1 victory and followed that up in Game 5 with a 7-1 victory. At home, the Nats were outscored 19-3. Kendrick was just 2 for 9 at home with 4 Ks, no RBIs, and now Houston led the series 3-2 after the Nationals were up 2-0. They were so close, but they could feel it slipping away. It would take an unbelievable comeback as they head back to Houston. And in a Game 6 must-win situation, the Nats bats exploded for 9 hits and 7 runs, but Howie Kendrick was starting to fade into the background. He was just 1 for 4 that game, and the single didn't mean a whole lot. He's had no extra base hits in the World Series, just 1 RBI, and he has not hit a home run since that grand slam. Game 7 of the World Series. The first base runner for Washington came in the top of the 2nd with a Soto single, but Howie Kendrick immediately grounded into a double play. Then in the bottom half of the inning, Yuli Gurriel homered to make it 1-0 Houston. 3 innings later, turning things over to the bottom of the 5th, Carlos Correa knocked in the 2nd run of the game for the Astros. It wasn't until the 7th inning when a Nats runner made it past second base on an Anthony Rendon homer to cut the lead in half. Soto followed by doing what he does best: a walk, a stroll, a nice little jaunt down to first base. That brought up Kendrick. 1 out, 1 on. He'd had a forgetful World Series to this point, the only time ever he'd been to one, and he probably wasn't going to get another one. Will Harris was brought in just to face him. First pitch, swing and a miss. He'd been lights out all postseason, but none of that matters now. He made us remember him.
Against him. That's down the right field line into the corner. This ball is gone for a home run. Nationals on top. Howie Kendrick has made it 3-2. Off the pole and right.
That one swing was the 13th highest championship win probability added ever, the 6th highest since 1969, and the 3rd highest since 1998, only behind the Tony Womack 2001 double and the Rajai Davis home run in 2016. The undersized kid out of the backwoods in Florida went from no scholarships to the big leagues to demotion to 2 of the biggest hits in MLB history and the 2 biggest ever for the Washington Nationals. Howie Kendrick can't be forgotten.
We're going to have tough times. We're going to learn how to win. But the only way you learn how to win is through all those mistakes and failures. And I'll tell you, all those failures are paid off today.